our role here in Traverse City as far as evangelism. And that's a subject. I can find this thing right here. Pardon me. There we go. Okay. But I'd like to read from the book of Acts, if you'd like to turn to there. Book of Acts in the New Testament. And this will, sometimes when I'm in a class and someone will mention a book, I'll say, now, is that New Testament or Old Testament? And then they'll tell me which one. In Acts chapter 17, Paul is obviously on his missionary journey. Or maybe not obviously to some people, but Paul is on a missionary journey. And he has, as it were, been booted out of several places, and they have escorted him out. And Paul has, verse 15 says, those who conducted Paul brought him as far as Athens, and after receiving a command for Silas and Timothy to come to him as soon as possible, they departed. If I mention the city Athens, what's the first thing that comes to your mind, and not in the biblical sense? The Acropolis, and the Olympics, architecture, Alabama. Athens what? Athens, Michigan? Okay. Everything's going to jog something a little bit different. But Athens was the cultural center of philosophy in the world at the time. Some of the greatest philosophers were here. Now, philosophers, and the next series, and I'm going to veer just a little bit, the next series of devotionals is going to be the life of Paul. And one of the first devotionals is going to talk about Paul, or Saul of Tarsus. And Tarsus is where one of the great philosophers of the Old Testament came from. And Paul may have known him as a young boy growing up. So Paul was well aware of philosophy. And as he comes to Athens, Athens being the center really when people were coming here, and it tells us that what people in Athens did. In verse 21 it says, now all the Athenians and foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new. Why? Because there were philosophers there, and they would talk about philosophy. And what do we do today when we want to hear about the newest thing that's coming down the pike? We Google it, yeah. You're much too modern for me, young whippersnapper. I say we turn on talk shows, and we listen to them banter these back and forth without really a stake unless you watch. And I'm not going to mention the show The View, so don't worry, I'm not going to mention The View. And I'm not falling on one side or the other, but if you want to hear some wild views, you could tune into that. And I'm not throwing stones at it. I'm not throwing stones at Oprah show that used to be on or any of these, but it's the latest thing that comes down the pike. It's the latest thing of something new to talk about in there. And Paul lands up in Athens. And it says, now while Paul was waiting, go back to verse 16, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. As a result, I say as a result, so he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers, which started in Epicureans, or Stoic, I get lost as to which one, but one of those philosophers started that in Tarsus. And you can go to your history books and find that out. So Paul would have been familiar with this. And Paul, being familiar with this, you come down to him in verse 28, he says, as even some of your own poets have said. What does that tell us when it says, as even some of your own poets have said? What's the door that opens a little bit to us into the life of Paul? How would Paul have known that? His education. Paul would have known. So he's able to draw from the culture and know what the people are thinking. He has to know the background. How many of you know who Sun Tzu was, The Art of War? How many of you knew him when he was still alive? This goes back well into BC. It's several hundred years before Christ. If I get my dates, if I'm off, then pardon me. But his strategy was, and if you read it, it's like 13 chapters. One of the things you must know in order to have a victory is you must know your enemy. You must know your enemy, you must know yourself, and you must know the territory to which you are going to have your battleground on. Paul chooses his place. It is the only time in the New Testament that we find that Paul debates with the philosophers. He begins, and it tells us that he reasoned in the synagogue. But then, where does he go? He goes to the marketplace. Because he has some shopping to be done, right? He takes his recyclable bag, and he's going to go down, he's going to do a little shopping. Why does Paul go to the marketplace? That's where the people are. Does anybody know the Greek word for marketplace? You're close. The agora. Okay? And we get the term agoraphobia. What does it mean to have agoraphobia? You don't like crowds. You have a fear of being around people, generally speaking. It's a phobia that people have, and it comes from that term. Paul is in the marketplace. And he has this discussion. But how does Paul go about this discussion? You're all wrong and you're all going to hell. Pardon me if you're on there. I'm simply using a little dramatic there. But is that the approach that Paul takes? No, he doesn't. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him, and some said, "What does this babbler wish to say?" And the term there for babbler, and I know this because someone had pointed out in Greek that the word means seed picker. It means birds that pick, they claw the ground for seeds. And that would have been, it's not a compliment that they're giving him. What does this seed picker, what's this rube think he's talking about here? Others said, well, he seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. Now, because you need to know a little bit about what it means to preach a foreign divinity in Athens, you have to know what the law is. Does anybody know what the law was in the Roman Empire in Athens for introducing foreign divinities? It could be the death penalty. You can't just come in and say, there's a new God. There's a new God in town, like announcing there's a new sheriff in town. There's a new God. We don't often see that when it says, he seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities. And that's a pretty serious accusation that they're coming up with here. He seems to be preaching a foreign divinity because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? For you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean. Now, he's going to combine the fact of what he's going to tell us about. They just want to hear something new all the time. And don't we? Isn't that why we tune into the news? Isn't that why we watch The View and Oprah? Absolutely. We buy newspapers and magazines. We want to learn about things that are new. And I'm not going to condemn people for wanting to learn things new. It's just the nature of human beings. But Paul uses this as his platform because he knows that they are going to want to listen to him. But they've made a serious accusation against him, one of which has legal implications that we may not realize unless we know the Roman culture. And to know that, Paul, you are in trouble if you are telling them there is a new God, a God that that isn't already in Athens. And, yeah, go ahead. Yes. Yes, and it's so clever. And it is said, and how many of you have seen the pictures from 2,000 years ago? Nobody? Yes. Yeah. We don't have anything. We don't know what Athens looked like. We have some of the buildings that existed, and we have some of the drawings that people had made from several hundred years ago, and some of those buildings have fallen down, destroyed some along the way. But we don't know what it looks like. But when it says that his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols, and those at the time say that there were more idols than they were people. Verse 16. Mm-hmm. Little softer. And the term for argued is, the Greek word that we use today is, no, not my name, no, that would be the word for moron. But it is apologetics. He's an apologist. And so when we read the term argued, what does your mind immediately go to when it says he argued? We're going to end this class now, and I'm going for the side door. He's leaving tomorrow. Yes, your mind goes to debating, disagree. Our mind leans toward, although we understand it because of the things that are talked about here, that he's not. It isn't that the hair is up on the back of his neck and he's got his fist out and we're going to have some fisticuffs. It's not what that's talking about. Sometimes it says that, as in mine, it says he reasoned or he argued for it. And to argue doesn't mean that there isn't always that tempers flare and you're exactly raise voices. It doesn't mean that, although if you're in because they take him to the Areopagus is the legal center. They have taken him before the courts, as it were, and are going to make him make his stand on what he has to talk about. Spoke to them, yep. Yeah, and he is reasoning, and there's a difference as you go about. And has anyone here found out just by walking around this world that people love to argue? It's just me, isn't it? I'm the only one that noticed that. People are angry. They are angry today. And does that appeal to you? If you walk up on two people that are arguing, and I'm talking about, veins are popping, faces are beet red, arms are waving, fingers are pointing, screaming, and you think, I think I'd like to just... Now, I'm more likely to say, I'm just going to kind of back away from this one because you don't know what's going to be incited. And we have seen evidence of that. Yes, and I'm going to head for the exit, or at least know where the exit is at. And so he says that you're bringing some strange things to our ears, and we wish to know, therefore, what these things mean. And Luke records for us, now all the Athenians and foreigners who live there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something. And that's the springboard for which Paul has gotten their attention. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, says, "Men of Athens," and here's where he insults them, doesn't he? No! "Men of Athens, I perceive," and why didn't he say men and women of Athens? Well, in that society, the women would not have been there. It was the men. Not excluding, but he's simply saying men of Athens. "I perceive that in every way you are very religious. Boy, did that open doors or close doors? He opened doors. He opened the first door simply by going in the midst of them and preaching. The door opened again when he, in a very complimentary way, and not only here in Acts chapter 17, but fast forward ahead to Acts chapter 21 and 22, when Paul, maybe more 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, when Paul has to make his defense again. Because remember, that same word for defense is what Jesus told his disciples. He says, don't worry about what you are to say when you have to make a defense. When you have to make that apologetics of what you believe in. It will be given to you in that day. And for them, it was the Holy Spirit that was going to be working, because he's talking to the 12. And for you and I, when it says, don't worry about what you are to say, that puts a pretty heavy burden on what you have to say. Because what I have to say has to come from here, not based upon the philosophy of the world. He says, but I perceive, I could see that you're very religious people. And what do some of your versions say? I'm looking for a very specific word that it says in one of the versions. Religious. The King James says that you are very superstitious. And we read that word superstitious and we think, well, he has just insulted them. No, they would have understood that, because it really leans towards that to say, I see that you're very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription: to the unknown God. This is one of my favorite passages when it comes to apologetics. One of my 10,000 favorite passages. Why? Because in...
He's not insulting them, he's bringing up what they already know.
Yes.
And he's using that to introduce the unknown God.
Exactly. And we often look at Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch and talk about Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch as the angel says, see that guy over there? Go see him. And, of course, it's the Ethiopian eunuch, and we think he's traveling in the same type of chariot as Ben-Hur is in. He isn't. He's probably traveling in a caravan as they're going along, because he's going back to Egypt, which is 100 to 1,000 miles or somehow. So he goes to talk to him. And how does he know what to talk about? Started where he was reading. He started where he was at. That's another one of my 10,000 favorite. Because as you look at each of these encounters that Paul endures in the book of Acts, and Peter, you see that there's a reason why these are given for us. Now, we don't need 10 different sermons on Paul preaching in Athens or Paul preaching in Tarsus, but we have this as a model that we can use. And Paul doesn't insult them, but he starts with something that they can understand. For as I passed along and observed the object of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription: to the unknown God. What therefore you worship is unknown, this I proclaim to you. Now he has made his events and says, I'm not talking about a new God, I'm talking about the one that you have identified here. And so he knows exactly where to begin. And as he goes through it, he says, the God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by hands, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath. It is a brilliant sermon, on which, how could I have ever come up with something that brilliant? In its essence, to be able to meet the people where they are at. Now note, yeah, go ahead, Tim. Mhm. Yes, and and for the people that say, "Well, I can worship any way that I want," uh, knowing how to approach that conversation is really where it's at, because Peter tells us that being prepared to make an answer for the hope that lies within you. How does one be prepared for every single question that could possibly be answered or asked? Pardon me. Anybody figure that out yet? 2 Peter 1:3. All things have been provided. Mm-hmm.
When I first started studying with people, I was so nervous and afraid of how to get it out. But eventually, I realized, what am I afraid of? The answers are here. All I got to do is say, let's go here, let's go there, and let them read it and talk about it. Not that you don't have to be afraid. You got the answers.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You know, I also, excuse me, found that when someone asks me a question, I don't have it right there in front of me. Look it up and go back to it. Say, I'm willing to study that a little more, I'll find the answer for you, come back to it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Absolutely. And there are several approaches. Some people have been blessed to have just the type of knowledge that, boy, it is just dripping off. I'm trying to think of the apologetics. Thomas, he's passed on now, but over in West Virginia, he was known for his ability to be able to debate. And it just seems like it just rolled off him. He had the answers, and we have known of people like that. And then there's the rest of us. The rest of us.
Jerry Tallman always said, you just tell your own story because that's what you know best. You don't have to make anything up. You don't have to
Yeah.
tell your own story.
Yep.
I started studying with people with another man who would go in and tell them. He would tell them about Jesus. And he said, if you don't believe this, you're going to hell. And I thought to myself, there's got to be a better way.
Yes, yes, and there is.
You put them on the defensive right away, and then they're not going to listen.
Absolutely, and there is a way, and I believe that the book of Acts, which is our guide, gives us such a variety of ways in which to approach. Because we find that Paul does go to the synagogue. He does find people who say, we're not interested. Now, unless we think that Paul's preaching here in Athens was a complete success and everything worked out and Athens was completely given over to Christianity, it says, now when they heard verse 32, now when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, but others says, we'll hear him again about this. So Paul went out from their midst, but some men joined with him, believing. Among them were Dionysius, the Areopagite. Remember the Areopagus? He has someone who is one of the officials there, and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. So it's not always going to be a success. But if you're only viewing what you do as it must be an immediate success and everybody must go, you're going to be disappointed. And you become frustrated and you might just walk away. But to realize that in this was a small victory.
If you could just relax and have a conversation rather than.
Yes. Yes. So if you'll indulge me for just a minute or two, as Greg, I would say, kind of embarrassed me, but for the last few years since I came to Traverse City, one of the first emails I got when I came here was about coming to join the Toastmasters Club. I don't know, to this day, I don't know who sent me the email. It was just something that came in my junk box, and I opened it, and I said, well, I'll go in there. And it's been a wonderful organization to be a part of. But it's been a way, it's nice to get the ribbons, it's nice to win the awards, but it is the doors that it opens for me. As a result, perhaps some of you might not have realized that when we were in Ghana, because I had the connections with the Toastmasters, we got into the U.S. Embassy. And the U.S. Embassy opens doors that you couldn't imagine. I didn't know the people that we were going to meet, but we went in, we got the clearance, and some of you might got the email that told about one of the workers for the Healing Hands International, Ebenezer Udofia, who just got his PhD. He was with us. So I got Greg and Udofia, Ebenezer, into the door so that they could meet people. It was just a way, it's looking about opening doors. It's what it's all about. It's not about the accolades. And as a result, as we talk about things that we're going to be doing in the future for the congregation, what have we done for the town of Traverse City for evangelizing? That's what you want to know. What have we done? How are we reaching out to the people of Traverse City? That's where the crickets start to chirp. You think, well, open the doors every day or every first day of the week at 10 o'clock. And that's great because that meets our needs. Oh, we're on the interweb, aren't we? Okay, and that's a good thing. And I've taken training to learn how to stand in front of a camera and not look like somebody who doesn't know how to stand in front of a camera. And you can see from the beginning of my videos to the end that there is hopefully some improvement. And I say that to say this, that we've put together these devotionals and classes, and I have compilations, in that when you see them, if you like them, that's well and good. Forward them on to your friends. Forward them on to people you don't know. Let them view it. Let them subscribe to the channel. We have 500, 600 videos out there. Some of them most are only 5 to 10 minutes long, but some of them are longer classes to be able to reach out to people. And I've used the Toastmasters as learning how to speak. You think, well, we hired you because you knew how to speak. I thought I knew how to speak. Yes. You didn't have to say that quite so loud. But the idea was to learn how to be better. Maybe I did speak well, but I wanted to speak weller. That's what I tell people. If you tune into Channel 9 and 10, you're probably going to see me on the television this week because they came and interviewed us. It's not about being on television. It's about the doors that is going to open. And because of being a part of that organization, if I told you some of the people that I study with on a regular basis in the town of Traverse City, you would recognize them because they are some of the biggest business people in town. And it's just the doors of opportunity. What are we doing? We're reaching out. But those are one at a time. What we would like to do is to be able to, through your efforts, how many of you, the class that was prepared for tonight? I sent out the link to the YouTube. I'm not going to look because I know all the hands are going to go up, so I won't be able to see everybody. But I put that together. Donato normally teaches it, but Donato is out of town, so he asked me in his absence to teach the class. So I thought, well, I'll just read it. Learning how to read is another art all its own. But to read it so that we're prepared for the class. Okay? Pass that on to other people. Be prepared for the class. Pass that phone number and the access code so that other people can join us. Because as long as we're just depending on the guy that stands up there behind that microphone to do all the work, it can wear us out. But learning how to, each of us, to be that person that's going to walk into Athens. You think, well, I could never do that. Yeah, and learning how to do those things. If you can't do it, all you have to do is send the link on some of these. And as I tell people, these videos that we're putting together, they're not rocket surgery. These aren't mountains of theological pontificating. If you've seen them, you know. You know me. I'm not a scholar. I'm just a plain guy, and most of the stories that I tell in there are just stories from my youth or things that we have observed in everyday life, but with an emphasis upon the Word of God. Last year we went through the entire New Testament. This year we have chosen themes. As I mentioned, next month are going to be the life of Paul. And so we're going to have 3 different devotionals that are centered on the life of Paul. And people have an interest in these. I've done the parables of Jesus. I've done the book of Proverbs. I've done Psalm 119, questions that Jesus asked in the New Testament, great chapters of the Bible. Anything, there's a lot of different things that people would take an interest in. You like one, just copy that link and paste it in an email and say, I think you might like this one. How many of you can remember when congregations used to have this big, they used to tracks, a track rack. Boy, I can really speak well, can't I? Track racks. How many of you can remember that? But pretty much you grab a track and think I know somebody who might be interested in this. Well, the new track rack is the internet. And through the access to the YouTube, virtually anybody can watch these. And I've tried to send you the link so that you can watch them. Once you've watched them, right-click it, or is it left-click it? You know how to do that. And send the link on, let someone else view it. If they don't watch it, you're not out anything, are you? But you've at least done what you could have done. And I've tried to cover subjects that are varied. And in closing, just talk a little bit about the debate. These weren't like the debates that maybe you had in high school, to where they give you a subject and you might have a couple of weeks to prepare, or you may have an hour to prepare. When they asked me a question, this is what it would be, and within 10 seconds I had to answer. General use of marijuana should be decriminalized or legalized, but not illegal. And that quick, they would give me 10 seconds and I had to answer it. Or if someone else answered and says, yes, I believe that marijuana should be legalized, I had to come back with an answer for that. Do you know how I prepared? I read the book of Proverbs. And I read the book of Ecclesiastes. I tried to know all the different questions, but you did not know until they gave you the question. Same-sex couples should be prevented from adopting children born of heterosexual interaction. You're going to meet people who are going to want to know the answers to that. I was fortunate enough that I got some easy questions and to have made it. But it was good practice. I was very fortunate. But it took a lot of training. But in the end, as much as I tried to know what the questions were going to be, I never knew them. You just never knew. You might be on abortion, you might be on war, it might be gun law. It could be a variety. And one of the other things that helped me the greatest, and I might embarrass some people here, but Jeremy's father-in-law. I told Jeremy earlier, I called him because many of my opponents were going to be from India, and I called his father-in-law, who is a missionary. He's not in India right now because of the things that are going on, but he has been a missionary for 20 years in India. I said, tell me about the culture. I want to know who my opponents are. I want to know how they think. I want to know what they value in this. And so knowing that they valued things like family and culture, that's where my debate started with, is talking about something that they could relate to, which was family, culture. But I ultimately had to know what the Word of God said. Not to preach at them, but to have a stance that I could take that was based upon something common. When Paul says, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the object of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription. It's the best we can do, is to know and to try to be prepared so that we have an answer for the hope that lies within us.
Were you able to say that, or you got your answer?
I would use certain quotes from the Bible, and I'd say, one of them that I used was, I want to be quick to hear and slow to speak on this, but because of time that we have, because you don't have time, you have to think on your feet, and I'm very fortunate, and I give God all the glory that He's given me a gift that I can use to try to get better with. Any questions before they ring? How many times have they rung that bell? 4 times? Have they twice? Oh, saved by the bell. Thank you for your kind attention.